People often reveal their character when power disappears. But the deepest betrayal is not always committed by the person laughing the loudest. "Get on your knees and clean it," Paige said, lifting her phone toward Maren's face. A piece of birthday cake lay beside Maren's shoes. Her breathing turned uneven, but she refused to move. "No." Nolan watched from the dessert table, one hand resting on a dark folder. His smile suggested that Maren's humiliation was merely part of the entertainment. A few feet away, 35-year-old Everett Sloan sat in a wheelchair, a dark blanket covering his legs. His fingers pressed into the armrests until his knuckles whitened. "Leave my wife alone." Judith turned toward her son without a trace of sympathy. "Or what, Everett?" Before he could answer, Nolan placed the folder across Everett's lap. "Before this party ends, you will sign temporary control of Sloan Ridge Capital over to me." Nolan's phone lit up. He read the message, turned the screen face down, and covered the folder with his palm. To everyone in that room, Everett had lost the use of his legs, his fortune, and the mansion he had built. By morning, he might also lose control of the company that carried his name. Judith lifted another plate of cake. "Your wife has forgotten whose house she is living in." Maren looked at Everett, still expecting him to stop what was happening. He had believed this confrontation would expose who loved him and who only wanted his power. But as Judith stepped closer, he faced a question he had never considered. How much humiliation could one marriage survive before love became resentment? If you enjoy powerful stories where betrayal meets unforgettable justice, subscribe to Luxury Justice Stories. Now, let's continue. 3 weeks earlier, Everett and Maren Sloan had been preparing for their anniversary. Everett had built Sloan Ridge Capital into a private investment firm, while 30-year-old Maren had earned her own reputation as a luxury event designer. She enjoyed beautiful clothes, carefully designed rooms, and the handbags she purchased with her own income. Everett had once admired that confidence. Lately, an old fear had begun changing the meaning he assigned to everything she loved. He wondered whether Maren loved Everett Sloan, or the comfort and influence attached to his name. That fear extended to his family. Everett had purchased Judith's home, helped his younger brother Nolan secure his first serious opportunity, unpaid tuition, rent, car expenses, and an allowance for Nolan's daughter Paige, Everett's niece. He had called it generosity. Increasingly, he suspected they considered it a permanent debt he owed them. The doubt deepened during dinner with his longtime friends Colin Harrow and Trevor Maddox. Colin joked about Maren's expensive taste. Everett reminded him that she paid for it herself. Trevor warned that wealthy men sometimes learn too late that people loved the life around them more than the man at its center. Everett rejected the warning aloud but carried it home in silence. Several days later, he passed an unmarked private building and saw Maren through the glass entrance with a well-dressed man. The man handed her a velvet case. She opened it, laughed, and briefly touched his arm. Everett did not know the building housed an appointment-only watch restoration studio. He saw intimacy where there was gratitude. Maren noticed his car pulling away but said nothing because she was protecting an anniversary surprise. Everett stayed silent because asking would require him to admit how quickly suspicion had taken hold. That night, Colin apologized and warned Everett not to turn one careless joke into evidence. Everett ignored the warning. He had already begun considering a controlled financial test that would expose the truth without a vulnerable conversation. By morning, he planned to claim that several investments had failed, watch Maren for 48 hours, then confess before their anniversary. The accident was not part of that plan. On the way to a meeting, Everett's vehicle slid on a wet road and struck a barrier. He was bruised and shaken, but scans and neurological tests found no structural injury. The doctors warned that unexplained weakness could improve suddenly. When Maren rushed into the hospital, pale with fear, Everett made an impulsive decision. He claimed he could not feel his legs. The doctors never told Maren he was permanently paralyzed. They said observation was necessary and that symptoms could change. Everett allowed her fear to fill the uncertainty. She stayed through the night, cancelled 2 events, contacted his office, and began researching how their home might need to be altered. When she left the room, Everett moved 1 foot beneath the blanket. Relief lasted only seconds. Maren returned with swollen eyes, believing the man she loved might never walk normally again. By sunrise, she had moved her meetings online and created a schedule for his care. She rested her forehead against his hand and told him they would build a different life if necessary. Everett nearly confessed. Then he remembered the velvet case and convinced himself that devotion during a medical emergency did not answer the question about money. He extended the test by 2 days. Later, he would tell himself that every extension had been temporary. In truth, each one made the next lie easier. 3 days after the crash, Everett showed Maren altered financial summaries created from old contingency templates. He told her several major investments had failed, company accounts were restricted, and their mansion was tied to business debt. Because Sloan Ridge Capital was privately held and Everett had always kept relatives outside its internal finances, the claim was difficult to verify. Maren read each page, then looked at him with anger rather than panic. "How could you hide this from me?" she asked. "We are married. You do not get to decide alone which disasters I am allowed to know about." Everett had expected calculation or emotional distance. Instead, Maren was furious that he had shut her out. She left the room before he could answer. For an hour, he believed she might not return. When Maren came back, she carried jewelry cases, garment bags, and boxes of designer shoes. Over the next 2 days, she sold nearly everything quickly and accepted far less than the items were worth. She kept one simple wedding bracelet and enough professional clothing to continue working. Then she placed the money in Everett's hands. "Use it for treatment, the debt, whatever comes first. We can rebuild things." "I cannot rebuild you." At that moment, Everett received the answer he had claimed to need. Maren had surrendered the life he thought defined her without being asked. He should have ended the deception immediately. Instead, another suspicion took its place. If Maren's loyalty was real, what about Judith, Nolan, and Paige? Everett told himself that the second test would last only 48 hours. He wanted to know how his family would behave if they believed he could no longer support them. He did not yet understand that once Maren had proved her love, every additional lie was no longer part of the original test. It was a new decision. The mansion was supposedly placed under lender control. Maren's apartment above her event studio had no elevator, leaving Judith's ground floor home as their only immediate option. Judith welcomed them warmly while neighbors watched and called Everett her brave son. Once the door closed, she asked how long they would stay and complained that the wheelchair might damage her floors. Nolan arrived that evening and calculated what 2 additional adults would cost. Paige asked whether her allowance would continue before asking how Everett felt. Maren understood that their concern had conditions. Everett saw the same thing but told himself he needed to know how far their selfishness would go. Judith dismissed most of the household help and asked Maren to assist with meals and laundry. Maren agreed because they were temporary guests. Soon Paige left clothes outside her room, Nolan stopped clearing dishes, and Judith treated Maren's help as payment for shelter. Maren's client work began slipping because every request was framed as urgent, but she believed Everett already carried enough. The conflict changed when Nolan arrived with a dark folder. He said Everett needed to grant him temporary voting authority to protect Sloan Ridge Capital. The documents went much further, allowing Nolan to speak for Everett, influence asset sales, and present himself as the company's acting decision-maker. Everett refused to sign. That night, he used a secure phone hidden among his medical equipment to contact General Counsel. He reported Nolan's pressure and warned of possible unauthorized access. No transfer could become valid without independent board approval, and security began preserving related logins, messages, and requests. The company was protected. Maren was not. Over the next several days, Nolan photographed confidential pages, contacted 2 executives, and described himself as Everett's likely representative. Maren caught him trying to unlock Everett's business phone, took it away, and ordered him out. Hours later, someone attempted to enter a restricted account using an old family password. The login failed, but two executives still requested an emergency board discussion, arguing that Everett's condition created uncertainty. Each development gave Everett another excuse to continue. He told himself he was exposing disloyal executives, not testing Maren. Yet she was the one losing clients, sleeping badly, and carrying the physical burden of care he did not need. One evening, Maren missed an important planning call after helping Everett bathe. Judith accused her of becoming useless the moment the money disappeared. Nolan laughed, and Paige complained that Everett's failure had ruined the household. Maren set down the dish towel in her hands. "I will care for Everett because he is my husband. I will not serve 3 healthy adults who enjoy watching us struggle." Judith threatened to send Everett to a low-cost care facility if Maren continued challenging the family. Maren replied that she would find an accessible room and move him within 7 days, even if she had to rebuild her business from nothing. For the first time, Judith looked uncertain. Later, Maren knelt beside Everett's wheelchair. Her eyes were tired, but her voice remained steady. "We are in this together. But I need you to stop shutting me out. I cannot fight your family, your company, and your silence at the same time." Everett could barely meet her eyes. He decided he would confess that night. Before he could, he overheard Nolan arranging an emergency board call for the morning after Paige's birthday party. Nolan planned to place the documents before Everett while relatives and guests were present, creating witnesses who could later claim Everett had signed willingly. 2 executives had agreed to support temporary authority if Everett appeared confused or weak. Everett's attorneys could still block the transfer. He knew the company was safe. But he convinced himself that one final day would expose everyone involved. He had learned how to protect his business. He still had not learned how to protect his wife from him. Paige insisted on holding her birthday party despite the supposed crisis. Judith ordered Maren to cook, decorate, serve, and clean to earn her place in the house. Maren refused to perform as hired help, but she agreed to prepare the cake Everett had promised Paige before the accident. She intended to leave with Everett the next morning. As guests arrived, Paige recorded cheerful videos about family loyalty, then criticized Maren whenever no one else was listening. Nolan kept the folder beside him and exchanged messages with the executive supporting the emergency call. Everett realized Nolan wanted an audience, not a celebration. Shortly before dessert, Nolan placed the documents on Everett's lap and demanded his signature. Everett refused. Nolan warned that the board might remove him from active leadership without his cooperation. Maren stepped beside the wheelchair. "Then the board can speak to his attorney. You are not forcing him to sign anything." Nolan stared at her with open resentment. Judith announced that Nolan was trying to save what remained of the family's future. Paige reminded the guests that Maren had once spent thousands on clothes and handbags. Maren answered that she had purchased those things with her own earnings and had already sold them to help Everett. The room shifted. Several guests stopped smiling. During the cake cutting, Paige deliberately dropped a piece beside Maren's shoes and raised her phone. "Get on your knees and clean it." Maren stared at the cake. "No." Nolan leaned against the table, smiling as though the humiliation were entertainment. "Leave my wife alone," Everett warned. Judith turned toward him. "Or what, Everett?" Paige laughed, but the sound weakened when Judith lifted another plate. Even Paige seemed to realize the moment had crossed into something uglier than teasing. "Your wife has forgotten whose house she is living in," Judith said. Maren looked at Everett. The hurt in her face was worse than anger. She still expected him to stop it. Judith pressed the cake into Maren's face. The room fell silent. Frosting slid down Maren's cheek. Paige kept recording, though her hand had begun to shake. Nolan still smiled. Everett looked at the woman who had sold what she owned, cared for him, defended him, and begged him to stop shutting her out. He had wanted proof of love. Now that love looked wounded and unfamiliar. He threw aside the blanket, placed both feet on the floor, and stood. No one moved. Maren stared at him as though the man before her were a stranger. Judith released the empty plate. Paige lowered her phone. Nolan's smile vanished. "Enough," Everett said. "Not one more insult. Not one more demand." He revealed that the accident had not taken his ability to walk and the financial collapse had never happened. The mansion was still theirs, and Sloan Ridge Capital remained secure. He admitted creating the deception because he wanted to know whether Maren would stay if his wealth and independence disappeared. "She answered me within days," Everett said. "She sold what she earned, changed her life, and stood beside me. The rest of you treated me like a dead investment." Nolan accused Everett of manipulating everyone and claimed the documents were intended to protect the company. Everett listed the photograph pages, the failed account attempt, the messages to employees, and the hidden authority Nolan had tried to obtain. Security had preserved the evidence, and independent board officers had already been warned. The company had never been in danger. Maren had. Everett announced that Nolan was suspended pending an independent investigation. Then he turned toward Judith and Paige, but Maren's voice stopped him. "How long?" Everett knew what she meant. He admitted that he had understood her loyalty after she sold her possessions and placed the money in his hands. Maren wiped frosting from her cheek. Then everything after that was not a test. It was a choice. Everett tried to explain Nolan's documents and the executives willing to support him. Maren asked why exposing his brother required allowing his wife to lose clients, provide intimate care for a man who did not need it, and endure public humiliation. Everett had no answer that did not sound like another excuse. Then Maren asked about the man with the velvet case. Everett's silence told her that the sighting had helped begin his suspicion. The man operated the private restoration studio. Maren had paid him from her own income to repair the damaged wristwatch that belonged to Everett's late father. The specialist had repeated one of his father's old jokes, and that was why she laughed and touched his arm. The velvet case had contained an anniversary gift, not evidence of betrayal. Maren looked at Everett for a long moment. "Your family failed your test. But you failed our marriage." Everett ended the party and sent the guests home. Paige deleted the recording, but Maren told her that erasing a video did not erase what she had enjoyed doing. The independent committee began examining Nolan's account attempt, confidential photographs, executive contacts, and pressure on Everett. Everett also ended the family's unrestricted access to his money. Paige's tuition would be covered through the current term, but her apartment, car payments, parties, and allowance would end. Judith would keep essential housing and medical support, but the servants, vacations, and unlimited spending were over. Maren told Everett that consequences were necessary, but money had become the language through which he controlled everyone. His relatives had abused his generosity, yet he had also used wealth to avoid boundaries, apologies, and difficult conversations. Even now, he was trying to repair betrayal by rearranging people's finances. For once, Everett stopped defending himself. They returned to the mansion that night. Nothing had been lost. The furniture, paintings, clothing, and personal photographs remained exactly where Maren had left them. Seeing the untouched house made the deception feel more deliberate than his confession had sounded. Maren reminded Everett that she had cancelled contracts, sold possessions purchased through her own work, believed he might never walk again, and endured his family's contempt while he continued watching. "I was afraid," Everett said. "Fear explains what you did. It does not excuse it." When she said she needed to leave, Everett did not threaten her, offer an extravagant gift, or demand immediate forgiveness. "I doubted the person who loved me most," he said. "Then I watched you suffer because I wanted more proof. I cannot ask you to trust me now. I can only accept what my decision has cost." Maren spent that night in the guest room. 2 days later, she moved into the apartment above her event studio. The stairs and limited space that had made it unsuitable for Everett's wheelchair no longer prevented her from living there alone. During their separation, Everett sent one written apology without excuses and asked how he should help repair the damage to her business. Maren sent him a list. He contacted affected clients, reimbursed direct losses, and explained only that she had faced a serious family emergency. He did not pressure anyone to rehire her. Some clients returned. Others did not. Repair became patient work rather than a transaction. The investigation found that Nolan had photographed confidential materials, attempted unauthorized account access, and pressured employees to recognize him as Everett's representative. He was terminated and required to repay personal expenses charged through company accounts. Because the login failed and no funds were stolen, no criminal charges followed. Everett refused to blacklist Nolan. His brother could seek work based on genuine ability, but Everett would no longer arrange opportunities, hide failures, or protect him from consequences. For the first time, Nolan had to separate his talent from the resentment built around Everett's help. Paige began working part-time for an event rental company and prepared to transfer universities. Her apology did not immediately restore Maren's trust. Judith resisted longer. Life without servants and unrestricted spending forced her to confront how dependence had hardened into entitlement. Months later, she sent Maren a handwritten letter admitting that pride had made her cruel. She did not demand forgiveness, and Maren did not offer it before she was ready. Everett stopped seeking advice from people who treated suspicion as wisdom. He did not blame Colin or Trevor for the collapse of his marriage. Their comments had encouraged his insecurity, but the decision to deceive Maren had been his alone. He began individual counseling. Several weeks later, he invited Maren to attend marriage counseling only when she felt ready. She eventually agreed, not because the wound had disappeared, but because Everett had stopped demanding reassurance and had begun accepting accountability. Their first sessions were not romantic. Maren described bathing a husband who secretly did not need her help, then watching him stand as relief became betrayal. Everett listened without interrupting. He admitted that his intentions became irrelevant once he understood the damage and continued anyway. After several months apart and in counseling, Maren agreed to a trial return home. She returned because Everett had respected her boundaries, told the truth when it made him look weak, and stopped using money to force closeness. Trust returned through ordinary promises. Everett shared financial decisions, answered difficult questions, and accepted that Maren might leave if honesty disappeared. He reimbursed her sacrifices into an account controlled entirely by her and recovered several sentimental items without presenting them as payment for forgiveness. Maren continued wearing elegant clothes and buying the handbags she enjoyed. Everett finally understood that loving beauty had never meant she loved him only because of his wealth. On their delayed anniversary, Maren placed a velvet case in front of him. Inside was his father's restored wristwatch. She told him the gift did not erase the past. It meant she believed they might still build something more honest than the marriage they had before. Everett fastened the watch around his wrist and promised that he would never again demand that love prove itself through suffering. He had created a test because he wanted to know whether Maren loved him without his money, influence, or strength. She proved that she did. The harder truth was that Everett had nearly destroyed that love because he did not know how to receive it without doubting it. His family fell into the trap he created. But Everett came closest to losing everything. Do you believe Maren made the right decision, or would you have handled it differently? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to Luxury Justice Stories for more powerful stories of betrayal, courage, and unforgettable justice. Watch next. Her family called her greedy for stopping a $12 million auction, but the necklace held their mother's secret.